My name is Bob Randolph. I have a company called Dental Practice Sales of Nevada. We are the only licensed dental practice brokers in the state. There's a couple others around, but they're not licensed in the state. I throw that in there because we are governed by the Real Estate Commission. If I were to do something wrong, you can always go to the Real Estate Commission because I have a real estate broker's license and a business broker's license. So there's a lot of protection there because of that. Oh, one thing I want to add to one of the things Roy was doing. When you put up your sign, I always encourage them to put your phone number up there also, because so many people drive down the street and they're on their phone. Just a small side note. As you can see, I have two dentists that work with me. Jack Harrington is in northern Nevada. Lisa Hogan is here in southern Nevada. I sold her practice about 3 years ago, and she called me and says, "Hey, I would like to come to work with you." So she went and got licensed, and now she's with us. Jeanette is my assistant. She's the one you talk to when you call the office. Now, I have to also say, I've got a doctor in the house who bought his practice through me. Dr. Utley back here. And so what I do, the first thing I've got up here, can we go to this one? This is an article that was in Dental Economics about the difference between starting from scratch or purchasing a practice. There's copies of it there on the table, but basically what it says, if you start from scratch, you're not going to see black ink for probably a minimum of 18 months. Maybe more. If you buy a practice, you're in a cash flow positive position from day one. For me, when I sell a practice, it includes the accounts receivable. That price is built into the price of the practice. So that when you buy a practice, on the day of closing, you get every dollar that comes into that practice from that moment on when you walk out the door of the escrow office. That's what that's about. It gives some numbers and whatever, but it's an article that was in Dental Economics. Okay, when a doctor calls me and says, "Hey, I'm thinking about selling my practice," I go and do an evaluation. Now, I am accredited to do that. I belong to the national organization that is for evaluating practices. And so what I do is I come in, I of course meet with them, see kind of where they're at, what kind of practice it is. And then there's a couple of just, I guess you just say, top rules of, because everybody will call and say, "Well, hey, what percentage is a practice worth?" One of the things is when I look at a practice, production does not mean a thing because there's so many ways to manipulate production. I deal only with collections. Money, you can't mess with that. I mean, you've got your, if you're buying a practice, of course, you're going to get P&Ls, which are more accurate than tax returns because you get what's called a recasted P&L. Can we? Okay, here's a recasted P&L. In other words, this is what went to the IRS. But there's a lot of things in there that do not affect you as a buyer. So this column are things that are called recasted out that would not be your liability as a buyer. So then you kind of get down to what the net profit of the practice is. Now, these are from a practice I sold about 4 years ago. But so you understand that difference, because when you get tax returns, obviously your lender wants tax returns, but they also want this. This is just a different year of a P&L. Does everybody know what a P&L is? Okay, it's a profit and loss statement. Okay, let's go on. Okay, these are some of the things that I get out of a computer when I go in to do an evaluation. This shows who's making the money in the practice. As you can see, the dentist, if there happens to be 2 dentists, there'll be 2 columns. There just happens to be only one in this practice. And then hygiene and the bottom numbers. Okay. And then here, this shows a percentage of the services that office is providing. Okay. And then this, it depends on your software. And I forget which software this is. I think it's EagleSoft, but I'm not sure. Probably the most prevalent one in this area is Dentrix. And but you can get so many reports out of your software. And that's what I do when I do an evaluation. It'll even tell you what zip codes those patients are coming from that practice that you're looking at maybe to purchase. Okay. There again, that's what services are being provided in that practice. Now, when I go to evaluate a practice, I include the accounts receivable. There's 2 ways to do it, and in different parts of the country, they tend to do it differently. But I like the purchase to be with the accounts receivable. It makes it so clean that when it closes, that's it. Yes. Pardon? Yes. That's what your accounts receivable are people who still owe the practice money. So if you buy a practice, that day of closing, all of that money that's out there being owed to the practice is yours. So the day you walk in after escrow, checks coming in are yours. And the way that's done is at closing, we go to the bank that the seller is using. The buyer, if they don't have an account there, they have to open one. And it's a 5-minute process. They sign a paper that all of those checks coming into that practice and that doctor's name are put into that account, but that account belongs to the buyer. So it happens with every practice I sell. So that's what, and if you want to put a value on the accounts receivable, it's usually 30 days is 90%, 30 to 60 is 70%, and 60 to 90 is 60%. Anything over 90 days, if there's a number there, I don't even recognize it, because if they're over 90 days, you're probably not going to get it. But any more in Las Vegas, hardly anybody carries receivables on the books. You're not a banker. And so they've got to pay for their dentistry somehow. And there's a lot of different ways to do it. Of course, they use their credit cards, but they have things like Care Credit. What are some of the other ones besides Care Credit? I know there's 3 or 4 out there. Lending Club. But there's a lot of ways. But you want to get your money. Okay, this is a production summary, pretty self-explanatory. This one happens to be by the day. Now, one of the things, that was the equipment, which is also taken into account. Now, when I go to evaluate a practice, I determine what that percentage is going to be. It's usually going to be between 60 and 75% of collections. But what I take into account is the location, the look of the practice when you walk in, the equipment. Did I say that already? Okay, the equipment. We don't itemize all of that stuff out. It's all just kind of put into the pot, and this is the what the practice is listed at. Now, one of the things I'm running into with lenders is Roy brought up the boy, did I just get a blank on it? The non-compete area. A lot of the lenders are requiring 10 miles, which in Las Vegas is ludicrous. What I've done in a couple of occasions is you go ahead and you do it in the contract because the lenders require it. But then I will have them make another agreement that it's going to be 5 miles is a very reasonable distance in the Las Vegas Valley. This happens to be the equipment list, okay? There's a few that do. Because they have no idea what the Las Vegas Valley is like. They're thinking of maybe LA or, metropolitan areas that are much bigger geographically. And sometimes I can talk them out of it if I know them. I have relationships with about 5 different lenders where I can actually talk to them. But once it gets to underwriting, those guys live in their own bubble, and many times you can't shake them, no matter who you know. So that's how I've taken care of that situation, because it can't be unreasonable. What? Why does the bank take care of any distance at all? Well, because if they're loaning you $600,000 to buy a practice, they want to make sure that the buyer or the seller that you just bought the practice from doesn't go down the street and open up again and start pirating your patients. Okay, so it's protect you. Yeah, they're protecting you. And that's one of the biggest protections that you have is the lenders, because they're loaning you the money. They want their money back. And so they're going to make sure, and again, the lenders that I have relationships with are all specialty lenders. Most of them only lend to dentists and veterinarians.
How much value do you place on goodwill?
Well, here again, this is an issue when you do your allocations, because the buyer has one set of priorities, the seller another. So I learned early on in my career, I just put the two accountants together and let them figure it out and agree, because they have to be exactly the same. You don't have to file it until you file your taxes, but they have to be exactly the same. And that's one of those items in that allocation. Did I answer your question? More or less, okay.
I just feel like a dental practice, I mean, how can you really place the value on a dental practice? You've got the equipment, you've got the staff, you've obviously got collections, but there's no guarantee when a guy comes in and buys a practice that really any of those patients are going to stick around, or you're going to have the same success as that previous owner. So
Well,
really, how much value is there on goodwill?
okay, that's something that you just have to determine. Now, I have a protocol for the transition of the selling buyer to the selling dentist to the buying dentist. One is the seller does not send a letter out. That's the kiss of death. You have a protocol that patients come in. I've got the wording for the front desk, for the hygiene, for the assistants, everybody on how to treat that patient, to tell them, well, Dr. Jones has retired. He's moved away, or whatever the situation may be. And Dr. Smith has purchased the practice. He's a wonderful dentist. You need to get to know him and give him a chance, because we think you'll just really love him. Along that lines. Another thing that, and I don't know if you do this or not, I've been through this with me, that every patient coming in the door is told 3 times by the staff what a great person and dentist that buying dentist is. 3 times by different staff members. Really important. Now, dentists who buy a practice through me, let me back up just a little bit. I still have an accreditation as a management consultant. I belong to the Academy of Dental Management Consultants, because that's what I was before I morphed into brokering 15 years ago. And so what I do is I bring everybody who is contemplating a practice, and I know they're serious, I know they're financeable. We come into my office, I sit them at my computer, and we do a 2-year budget and business plan. And they do it. I walk them through it, but they enter everything in themselves so they understand what they've got in there. It comes out to be about a 27-page document. And it's just for the buyer. But you have an understanding of the numbers. Also, most of the lenders require a monthly P&L. And if they don't, I do. Now, I don't have the authority to, you as a buyer, say, you must do this, but it's in your own best interest to learn how to manage your practice. And the biggest tool that you have is the software. If you use the software the way it's designed, which probably not 1 in 30 dentists do. The ones that do, you can manage your practice so easily from that software. You can also protect yourself against embezzlement. Embezzlement, I don't know what the numbers are now, but they were like 1 in 4 last year. It's pretty prevalent. But if you use your software correctly, and all of the major softwares are basically the same. they'll give you the same information. Yes. Okay.
So can the numbers that are generated from the software be like
The way, now I'm most familiar with Dentrix. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Roy would probably, isn't there 7 levels of access in Dentrix? Yeah, so everybody in the office has access to whatever you want them to have. Now, level 7, only you as the business owner should see level 7.